welcome to another Videolab tutorial. I will be going through some more Klak stuff, starting with the use of knob input and float filters. So I've got this simple UFO setup here again, and on the main camera I've got a bloom effect. So let's say we want to mess around with some of these values in our video pack. For instance, the intensity could be nice to have some control over this value. So let's get over to this patcher and nope, wrong one. This one, yes. What I've got set up here is a simple knob input node, and the value that is going to the input of a float out, which is set to the main camera, the bloom component intensity property. So this will be sending its value straight to the float value of the intensity. And important to note is that the knob input, by default, it will send values between 0 and 1. So as we can see over here, this debug slider represents our knob. This is the knob all the way to the left, 0, and now the intensity is off, is 0, and now we are in intensity 1. So let's have a look at this. The main camera, and I'll be using the actual knob, and we see it's 1, and we're going down to 0, and we can get back up to 1. But let's say we don't actually want to have intensity values ranging from 0 to 1. Let's say we want to range from 1 to 2. So what we can do is go over to the knob input node and edit the response curve. So we click on the response curve and we see this curve over here. The x-axis of this curve represents the input. So this is the input coming from your OPZ's knob, and this input is limited from 0 to 1, so only this part of the curve is actually relevant in this case. So the y-axis represents the output value, the value the node is actually gonna send out. So this curve is just linear from 0, 0 to 1, 1, so the input and output is the same. But now if we want the values to be ranging from 1 until 2, like we said, we have to edit key, and here it says time and value, and time for some reason it's called time. This is the x-axis, the OPZ input. If the value is 0, so knob all the way to the left, we want output value 1. And over here on the right, time 1, we want the value 2. And here we have it, a new response curve, and let's have a look. Intensity is at 2, now we go down to 1, and we go back up to 2. Great stuff, this is what we wanted. There's also another way to get the same result, and first I'll click here to get the original response curve. Now it's back to 0, 0 to 1, 1, like the default one, and we'll be using a float filter. So create filter, float filter, here we go, and value input, output to input. And what this float filter does is it takes the input from here, apply some basic math to it, and then output the new value. And what it output is, here it says output equals response input times amplitude plus bias. This response input, what it means is, if this is checked, it will actually send your input first through the response curve. It will apply this curve to it, and the default is also the 0, 0, 1, 1, so input is same as output, but you can mess around with this obviously, and then you get a different response input. But if this is turned off, it will just use the input times amplitude plus bias. And so this is what we'll be doing. So we want the values to range from 1 until 2. So the values coming in here, the input of the float filters, range from 0 to 1 because we selected default response curve from the knob input. So if 0 comes in, we actually want 1. So what do? 1 equals 0 times x plus y. The amplitude doesn't really matter because 0 times whatever is still 0, so it's only the bias that's interesting for this. So if you want 0 to be 1, we just have to select the bias of 1. Now we want if the input is 1, we want the output to be 2, so 2 equals 1 times x plus 1. Our bias is already set, so the amplitude, this x should also be 1 to get output 2. 1 times 1 plus 1 equals 2. So let's see what we have. And 1, and back to 2, and back to 1, and see, there we have it. The exact same result as just messing around with the knob inputs response curve. So basically you've got two different options to get this same result. But now let's say we want this knob, which is channel 16 knob number 1. Let's say we want this knob not to only affect the intensity but also the radius, and we might not want these values to be the same. We might want the knob to send a different value to the intensity as to the radius. So for instance, if the knob is all the way to the left, we want intensity 1, but we want radius 2 perhaps. So the range of the radius values should be different of the intensity values. And I've got something set up over here to achieve this result. So these are two float outs. I call them radius and intensity to see which one is which. We got a knob input. Let's hook up this value to this float filter right here and to this float filter right here. This float filter has a bias of 2 and amplitude of 5, so this will be ranging from if the input is 0, we get 0 times 5 plus 2, so the minimum will be 2 and the maximum will be 1 times 5 plus 2 is 7. So this one, the radius will be ranging from 2 until 7. And the intensity float filter, the bias is 0 plus 15. So if the knob is all the way to the left, we get 0.15, and if it's all the way to the right, we get 1 times 4.85 plus 0.15, so the maximum will be 5. And note that this is the case because our response curve for the knob input is just the default one, 0 to 1. If this curve would be different, then these input values would be different, and then we would obviously also get different outputs sent over to here. So if we want two different value ranges coming from the same knob, we have to use float filters with different amplitude and bias settings to get different results. So let's have a look at this. Here we go, all the way to the left. and intensity 0.15, radius is 2, cannot go lower than this. If we go higher up again, the intensity is 5 and the radius is 7. And there we have it. So another thing I want to show you is disabling nodes. So over here I've got a node input going into a trigger which I set to state count 3, and I've got 3 event out nodes here, 1 for each state. And the first node, event out node, it enables radius and intensity. So I gave these two a name so it's easy to find them. Easier to just go here, and here it is radius and intensity, so to radius in here and then float out, select the script here, float out, and pool enabled, and it's on, and same for intensity. So basically this state, it makes sure that both these float outs of these game objects, that this is on. The second state enables the radius, but it disables the intensity, and the third one, it disables the radius and it enables the intensity. Another quick thing to note is that, as you can see, I've chosen to use the float out pool enabled, so I'm actually using the script enabling and disabling the script itself. Another option would be to just go to the game object and use set active bool, and then you can also enable and disable. So the difference would be between toggling this and this. I found that using this is more reliable. Sometimes if you actually disable the game object, the node for some reason still functions. So what this setup here actually does is it toggles between 3 different states where it turns on and off the radius and intensity nodes over here. So with in the original state, this one button, this one knob is affecting both, as we can see here. Both are getting affected. Now I press the button, and now the knob only affects the radius, because the intensity is this here is turned off by state 2, disables this one, so now only the radius is getting affected by the knob. As we can see, different state, and now only the intensity is being manipulated and not the radius. And now we go to the other one, different state, another press, and here we go. Both are, wait, I'm a bit confused now. Now we are getting both, okay. Now only the radius, okay. And now only the intensity. And now both again, yeah, okay, it's working. Alright. So, this might not be the most interesting use of disabling and enabling patches, although it might be useful if you want to give people the option to edit these values separately or together, or just do it with one knob so you can save the different knobs for different things. But enabling and disabling patches can be useful for many different things. You can also disable entire patches actually, so you can get creative with what kind of behavior you want enabled and disabled this way. Another thing I want to get through here is setting up an initial value for your knob. Let's say if you load your video pack, maybe you want it to start in the setting like this, with the bloom in the maximum intensity and radius. Then what you have to do is can get a random value input node, so create input, here is random value, this one over here, send on startup enabled, and use a knob out node, channel 60, knob number 1, which is same as here, and this output into the absolute value. And so, like I said, the knob values range between 0 and 1, so what you have to do is send values between 0 and 1 into here. And with this debug slider you can basically mess around with this and see what value you actually want based on the effect you're getting. So let's say 0.5 actually looks good, I want it like this. When the video pack starts up, well then I do it like this, I send 0.5 in there in the knob out, so this will send the value to my OPZ 0.5, and then from here it will get sent to the radius and intensity to both their respective values. Thing to note with this is that in Unity, especially if you're using a lot of initial values, if you're getting lots of random value nodes into different knob outs, if you set a lot of initial values, it might not look like it is actually working in Unity. Sometimes when you send an initial value, wait, let's see actually now if it's working or not. We'll see what happens. Get this setup, absolute value, okay. And let's see, we've got our intensity and radius, and let's see what happens when it starts playing the scene. Oops. And as we can see, it's on 0.15 and 2. So that is actually not the value that it should be, because if it's 0.5, as I said it here now, it should be on 2.575 and 4.1. So let's try that again. And again, it's not automatically set to the value it should be. So it looks like this doesn't actually work, but if I now nudge the knob on the OPZ a little bit, it immediately jumps to the values it should have been. So what's going on is this value is on startup getting sent to the knob. So it's actually sent to the OPZ immediately, so it actually does what it's supposed to do. But Unity seems to have some problems with immediately reading that value here on the knob input node to immediately send it to where it's supposed to go. But luckily this is not an issue once you actually build the video pack and load it into the app. The value is immediately sent to the OPZ, and in the app it's immediately sent to where it's supposed to go. So even if it looks like it's not working in Unity, it actually does work in the app, sending the values to a knob out like this. Alright, that's it for now. Let's get to the next thing later.